So what do you think is the root of all these men's issues?
You know, I would say that when it comes to social problems, some people say if the root of all evil is money, the root of all evil is some single problem. I don't think there is a single problem. It's a collection of influences that I think the easiest way I can put this is I like to look at society as just a very big room that needs to be cleaned. You know, as a tendency, it goes toward chaos. Things get dusty, things get dropped on the floor, you got to vacuum, but the room is so big that one person can't clean it. You need to have all sorts of people who may have different skills. Some people are better at vacuuming, some people are better at dusting, some people are better at doing the laundry or what have you. And the best way, I think, to really model this is to understand that there are so many causes, factors at work that make the room dirty, that harm society, corrode at it. And it takes an effort from people who want to do what they want to do, all working in parallel. They don't need to necessarily agree on how the room should best be cleaned. They just need to understand that there are issues that need to be solved, there are ways that the room needs to be cleaned, and they just clean what they can.
Could you give some examples of what are some contributing factors to men's issues being ignored?
I would say cultural misandry is a big one, and I will go ahead and go even more specific. And on A Voice for Male Students, an excellent resource, by the way, on inequities in education, inequities that harm men and boys. There's a wonderful piece on there called The Language of Misandry in Academia, where you have a collection of quotes in context of corrupt administrators and instructors on college campuses that would say things like don't forget about due process, it doesn't apply to Duke University, as in the case of the Duke lacrosse case. And there's also another example I can give you from my own experience when I was interviewing a Canadian scholar named Dr. Adam Jones. And he was faced with opposition in a peer review process, even though he brought objective research on the male victims of genocide. His research was blocked because he was critical of feminist scholarship. So the factor I'm pointing out here is that misandry and gynocentrism in academia actually spreads misinformation that can spread and cause other issues such as the media portrayal of males being negative, and even contributing to the neglect and ignorance of violence against men. So institutional bias and misandry in academia, I think, is one of the factors, and a very big one. Another factor I could point out to you is I will go ahead and say that money certainly is a factor. I wouldn't call it the factor, but one of them. And I would refer you to Erin Pitsey and her excellent take on the domestic violence industry and how its corruption has led to further ignorance by making the issues needlessly gendered when they're simply human. And the factor being that contributing to the neglect or the demonization, the vilification of men, is actually profitable, which is a very frightening prospect, as it is right there. So I could go on to talk about violations of due process. We've gone to academia, we've gone to domestic violence interested, we could talk about the judicial system in violations of due process. I was up in 2 different rallies, one in Dayton, Ohio, where we were in support of Nicholas Alaverdian, who was accused of sexual assault by somebody who had, I believe it was 27 inconsistencies in her testimony. Don't quote me on that number. But it was a high number of inconsistencies, and the police officer even lied about Alaverdian confessing to the crime, even though the cop himself had a record of lying. So we ended up, and I myself called other people to talk about this case. And it was important because Nicholas Alaverdian himself was denied a jury trial when he was in the circumstances where he could demand one as a basic human right. He was denied that jury trial. And so we were operating on the innocent until proven guilty because sexual assault was never proven. And I was there, and I was asked to call media outlets to say, hey, could you come cover this story? Did you get our press release? And they would say they got the press release, and thank you, but the only van that showed up didn't stay. So this shows that there is a willful ignorance of a human rights violation in the judicial system, and the media participated by refusing to cover the story. And similar things happened up in Accountability Rally in Maine, which I came back from not too long ago, where we gave an opportunity for several victims. This was held by Integrity for Maine, by the way, an organization called Integrity for Maine. And they offered victims of the district attorney's office in Hancock County, Maine, opportunities to share their stories as for how they were victimized by violations of due process. Now, this included both men and women, but fathers' rights activists were interested in this because there were fathers that were victims of prosecutorial misconduct, the most prolific case being Vladik Fillers, if you've heard of that. And in essence, these rallies point out corruption of the judicial system, point out corruption in district attorneys' offices. Again, the media is called, but no one seems to care. So those are your factors. We've got judicial system accountability problems. We've got accountability problems in academia. We've got accountability problems in the media. And there is a industry that profits from the system being the way it is. It's very deep, it's very sick, and something needs to be done.
Let's shift gears for a second.
Sure.
What are some of the misconceptions about the men's movement?
Where to start? Well, of course, there's the one that we hear first and foremost: we hate women. Well, look at the women who are in the movement, who we respect greatly, and they are working deeply in the movement. And I believe there was an interview recently. I don't know where. I think Paul Elam was given the interview, where he was asked about women. Of the women in the movement, and Paul stressed that these women were members. They were partners. We are working together toward these issues, and he said this to make sure that we're not trying to say that they're just our allies, like they're not just on the side. No, they are very much a part of us, and we love and respect each and every one of them for their contributions. But when we look, even though it's so obvious that the respect is there, even though we have women who are on the forefront saying that they care about these issues, there's still the categorization of us all as simply misogynistic, because we criticize very popular ideas about gender when simply we're taking a good, honest look at men and women and saying things that people were previously afraid to talk about. So that's a big misconception there. Another would be that we don't do anything. I actually, I'll admit, I take personal offense to this sometimes, because there are people I know who have gone out and they go to great personal expense to, they travel, they go out poster and risk their reputations talking to people. Daddy Justice is a great example. Daddy Justice is essentially a one-man paparazzo, somebody who pursues corrupt lawyers and captures their corruption on camera. An amazing individual. And he's risking a lot, and even though what he does would scare anybody, he still finds a way to overcome his fear and actually do it. And then there's people like myself who work toward institutionalizing the men's human rights movement on college campuses. This involves organizational work, tons of meetings, getting print materials done, and just work. And when people say that we're not doing anything, I often you notice that this often comes from people who themselves offer nothing but commentary. I could go on and on and on about misconceptions, but I would just say that to summarize it all, we're presumed to be hateful when we're simply critical, and we're presumed to be inactive when we are very active. I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
It's interesting. I don't think so far, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so far you've even said the word feminism. Is that right?
I believe I said it once when I was talking about Dr. Jones and the academic bias he faced, and that was simply because there was a feminist consensus that his publication, one of his publications regarding gender-based genocide, was not being accepted for a journal publication. Mm. There's a book he has called Gender Inclusive that goes more into that.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because there's a popular idea about the men's movement that they hate women and hate feminism particularly, but it's not for men's issues, it's to take down feminism. But I'm
There's
not getting that from you.
Well, I will say that I am very critical of feminism, but I will say that another misconception I'll actually give you here is that A Voice for Men in particular, and in the men's movement, that it's anti-feminist at the core. No, not necessarily. It's anti-misandry and anti-gynocentrism, and anti-feminism is a common expression of those values. Now, I call myself anti-feminist, but I am a very strong supporter of gender equity. It's just a matter of the criticism of feminism is simply being made by people who have been very used to not being heard, and now they feel like they have a chance, and now they're just letting it all out. Finally, I can say something. It's been taboo to talk about. This is still taboo to talk about it, but they're feeling more comfortable finally expressing what's been pent up for a while. Now, I would say that the men's movement and the anti-feminism, it's very much simply coming from a bunch of people who have experienced an institutional form of feminism firsthand. Not feminism as an idea, as the way it's marketed, but as it's implemented, as its institutional, actionable form. And they've decided it's not really for them. And so they simply want to change. And I actually want to share something with you here. This was from recent research. In 2010, there was a survey by a group called YouGov. And this was the source for a Washington Post article, you may have seen it, that said that feminists were still, I think it was like 18%. This is like 18% of United States women considered themselves feminist. I could have that number wrong, but I do know that the sample size from the source cited was 1,000. And the Washington Post article said, well, this is bad because feminists are a minority in women. A minority of women consider themselves feminist. Now, we could say 1,000 people is hardly representative of the U.S. population. But something bugged me when I looked at another source. There was another publication called Pew Research, P-E-W Research. They had a sample size of 1,002 from the United States for a different survey question. And they simply asked, do you believe that women should have equal rights to men? The wording's along those lines. Now, so we have, this was a survey, a huge survey, over 22 countries. The consensus was overwhelmingly yes, except in Nigeria, which was the only country to say no, but the gap was pretty close anyway. So we have an overwhelming consensus toward a feminist-friendly idea, right? That question, should women have equal rights to men? Yet we have a sample size of an equivalent sample size of the United States and the Washington Post, where we have what is said a minority of feminists. Now again, 1,000, not representative of the United States, hardly. But if we were to assume that the Washington Post was correct in saying that feminists were a minority, how is it that we still have so many people who would follow a feminist-friendly idea but still not identify as feminist? That is an indication, I think, that there's something about feminism that bothers people, even though they have egalitarian sentiments. That indicates to me that there is a part of feminism in its actions through violent protest or something of that nature that tells people, if we're trying to shoot for a gender equitable society, perhaps feminism is not the way. So the criticism of feminism, I think, is rational and necessary for an open dialogue. But it is not necessarily reminiscent of the stereotype 1950s traditionalist household where you go and make me a sandwich. No. It's just people who want to change, who've watched feminism in action and simply want to try something different. Now, I understand that I might have gone on a kind of a tangent here, but whenever I do my activism, I do it to solve problems. I think problem solving is the foremost, pragmatism is the foremost goal, the foremost approach. And for that reason, I don't go out and try to destroy feminism, because how the hell do you do that? You can't. You can't destroy what is, in essence, something that people could subdivide and recreate and join at will. And I wouldn't want to do that. I would want people to have the opportunity to identify themselves however they like, say whatever they like, and what have you. but I am against gynocentric and misandric actions. And those who identify as feminist either enable or act upon those, and because it's so common, it's easier to point out, it's easier to look at the feminist institutions at work and scan them for gynocentrism and misandry first, because it's very likely you'll find some there.